Hieronymous Grabiner was going out of his fucking mind. He remembered everything now. He had stared at his daughter's blue crayon for as long as he could, trying to focus on her blue hair, on her name, on Tori, when suddenly a line of conversation came back to him. "But have you ever had a blue snow cone?" It was her voice. It was Tori's voice. The same voice he had heard before. At first, he only remembered small things. He remembered sitting across from her at a table in a restaurant. He remembered watching her sort through Valentine's Day cards in the mailroom. He remembered watching her sleeping on his bed from his desk, just watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Everything else started to come quickly afterward. The battle with Damien. The way they had snogged in the detention room. The way he had taken her at the dark dance when he had chosen her over his duty to the school. He remembered the way she kissed him, the way she snuggled up to him at night, the way she moaned when he kissed her neck, and the way she sobbed when she thought their relationship was coming to an end. Tori was his. She belonged to him the same way he belonged to her. Whatever hell he was trapped in right now, he had to find his way out of it. He didn't have the stone around his neck, which led him to consider that he was trapped in some kind of nightmare that he couldn't wake from. At first, he tried to play along. When Violet kissed him, he kissed her back, trying to pretend nothing was wrong. But the more he started to remember, the more disturbed he became. Violet was dead, and whatever the specter was, it wasn't real. Tori was real, and he was only glad that she wasn't here to witness whatever hellish landscape this was. If she was, he wasn't sure if she'd ever be able to forgive him for playing along with his dream for as long as he had. He honestly couldn't believe he didn't figure it out sooner. When he woke up that morning, he went back to the books of research on his desk, but they were only filled with meaningless black scribbles meant to imitate the shape of words. That had been his first real clue to question his reality. It was often said that people couldn't read in dreams, which meant that he was stuck in some kind of nightmare. But was it a curse? A spell? How had this happened to him? He couldn't remember, and as much as he hated to admit it, how it happened was just as important as figuring out how to get out of it. He wasn't sure if he had dreamed of Tori crying over his body, or if it was real, but if it was, he at least took solace in knowing that his physical body was probably unharmed. Tori would not let any physical harm come to him. He could trust in at least that much, which meant that he had to somehow put the scattered pieces of his mind together and wake up. He'd always heard that if you died in a dream, you could die in real life, but he had always dismissed that notion as a ridiculous aphorism. He could try to drown himself, sure, but what if the act caused his lungs to physically fill with water as a result? He wasn't sure, but he also had no idea how long he had been here for. Every day was exactly the same as the day before it. How long had he been stuck in this reality before he had even clued into the fact that something was wrong? He had no idea how long time passed in this realm. He could have been here a week. He could have been here for years. If this had happened years ago, he might not have cared if he fell victim to this trap. Potsdam would be frustrated that she needed a new blue magic professor, and his father would have to find someone else to take up his title, but his life never really mattered to anyone. But now it did. It mattered to Tori, and what was worse, he was starting to realize that his life mattered to her friends as well. They cared about Tori, and they cared about him as a result. He had been their professor, and though they would never become proper friends, he was beginning to consider that their presence wasn't altogether as insufferable as he first thought. But Tori, though, that was the big one. He could not leave Tori, his wife, his real wife, alone for years. It would absolutely devastate her. What if he finally did manage to awaken one day to find her older than he was now? How could he live with the realization that he hadn't been strong enough to just wake up on his own? How could he live with the knowledge that he had failed her so badly? This last thought gave him the push to propel him to do what needed to be done. And it didn't work. The act worked, sure, but he woke up in bed that morning and wandered into the kitchen to find Violet cooking breakfast in the kitchen and the children coloring at the table as if nothing was wrong. That had led him to try to devise alternative methods, each more desperate and barbaric than the last. But nothing worked. He woke up the same way he did every morning, still no closer to any kind of answer on how to escape from this dungeon. He sighs as he heads into the kitchen and slumps down at the table. "What, no kiss?" Violet teases him. "You must have really been working hard this morning, hero." "Hey!" He raps his knuckles on the table to get the attention of his kids. He couldn't look at any of them too closely. Disturbed did not even come close to describing how he felt about his non-existent offspring. "Go play outside." As they run off, he can't help but turn back to Violet. "We need to talk." "Boy, don't you sound serious," she teases. "Someone wake up on the wrong side of the bed?" "We need to talk," Hieronymous says quietly. "You were smart. Sometimes I thought that you were smarter than me. You might be able to help me with something now." "Were?" she asks as she puts her hands on her hips. "I was smart?" Not now," he says with a sigh. "I think I might have been cursed." She stares at him, waiting for him to go on. "This world, this life, this isn't real. I'm trapped in some sort of a dream." "It does feel like that sometimes, doesn't it?" she asks, and he just rolls his eyes. "Just listen to me," he snaps at her. "Say someone cursed you or used a spell on you that made you question your surroundings." "Blue magic," she replies automatically, and he stops and considers this. "It's not an illusion," he says at length. "I've already tried to dispel it, but I don't think this is an illusion. This isn't real, either. Everything I've gathered tells me that I'm dreaming and I'm trapped in some sort of nightmare. I'm just not sure how to wake up." "Oh, so first our life is a dream and now it's some kind of nightmare?" Violet teases, but Hieronymous literally can't take it as he begins to beat at his skull with both hands. Maybe if he physically detached his brain from his body, that would do the trick. "Hero, stop. You're starting to scare me." "Then answer me," he thunders as he turns back to her. "I thought that, if I died in a dream, I would wake up. That clearly isn't true, and I don't think my physical body had died either, otherwise I doubt I'd still be here. I have tried everything I can to think of to end it, and nothing seems to work. I just wake up the same routine every morning, and I can't take it anymore." "So this isn't enough for you anymore?" Violet pouts, crossing her arms over her chest. "This life is too boring for Mr. Grabiner. Would you rather have just become a viscount like your father?" "Yes!" Hieronymous exclaims suddenly, and the answer seems to surprise the both of them. "Yes, anything would be better than this utterly mundane nothing that I seem to be trapped in." She frowns as she stares him down. "You knew how bad the situation was for me," she says quietly. "You knew I couldn't stay there, and you agreed to run away with me. It had been your idea. You always wanted to be with me, and I finally gave you that chance, and look where it got me. And now you're turning your back on me?" Hieronymous just shrugs uncomfortably. "You said you loved me," Violet reminds him. Tears are forming in her eyes now, and he can't look at her. "You said you'd always love me. You said you wanted to spend the rest of your life with me." Hieronymous looks at her, expecting it to hurt, but it doesn't. He stands there, looking at the woman he had once loved, the woman that he had failed, the woman that had died, and he felt nothing. She was begging him to stay, but he felt nothing. He thought he might. He thought he should. But hiding out in some secret cottage in the middle of the other world, that wasn't what he wanted. He always said he hated being busy, but it was far superior to the boredom that seemed to rip through him now. He just shrugs. That's what I thought, too, but I've been wrong before. I thought I would never find anyone that I could love like I loved you. It took me over a decade, but I moved on. I'm sorry, V, but I've moved on. Violet bursts into tears as she runs into a back room, and he sighs as he sinks his face into his hands. At least she wouldn't remember this conversation tomorrow. She never seemed to remember anything from the day before, and although a part of him felt he should be thankful for that, he had to remind himself that this wasn't Violet. Violet was dead. Violet was gone. He couldn't allow himself to pretend otherwise. He sniffs suddenly as he looks up, realizing that Violet had burned whatever it was she was cooking. He gets up and stares down at the burnt remains of breakfast, just staring at the black ash in the pan as if waiting for it to gain sentience and speak to him. It couldn't say anything. He knew it couldn't, but he felt like he was just on the edge of an epiphany, and he didn't want to move until he was sure he had this right. Self-immolation. It was one method he hadn't tried yet, probably because he was scared to try it. He had tried several painful methods of waking himself before, but none seemed as terrible as this. Yet, didn't he need to try something extreme and perilous? He had already tried setting out from this house on foot and walking as far as he could, but eventually his legs gave out, and when he awoke, he was right back in his bed. No, maybe he had been right the first time. If he was able to reduce this figment of a body to nothing, then there would be nothing to wake up the next morning. His previous attempts had always left his physical form more or less intact, but this had the potential to work. If this body no longer existed, then this dream space shouldn't either, and it might be the jumpstart he needed to wake up once and for all. He walks outside and falls to his knees, staring up at the blank sky overhead. Without even consciously trying to do so, he reached for the stone around his chest, but no matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't appear. He couldn't feel it. He couldn't feel her. What if he had been gone for years? For a decade? What if Tori had decided he would never wake up and had moved on with her life? What would he do if he woke up and she was no longer with him? He glances over his shoulder. He could stay. He could have a life with Violet. They could raise their family, and he could pretend that this was what he still wanted. He had thought it was. He had thought it was for a long time. But now that he was actually living it, he just wanted to go home to his frenetic schedule, to his father's unyielding demands, and to his wife, his real wife, who was ignorant and flawed but fiercely devoted. His real life may not have been a happy one, but it was a real one, and that was what he wanted. I love you, Tori, he whispers, and there are tears in his eyes as he says it. This will work. This will work, and I will wake up. I promise.